Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. With me is Jack DiMatteo.
Hello everyone.
And Charlie Zigmund.
Hi everybody.
And together we're three accountants that are going to be talking about news in business and taxes and accounting. That's usually our topic coverage. Well, let me just tell you what we're really talking about today. Today, we're going to be talking about the birth rate falling to a 42-year low. Gilded launches a crypto payroll platform. Would you want to be paid in cryptocurrency? We're going to talk about the shortage of inventory in the housing market, which appears to be the underlying cause of the hot market and higher home prices. And finally, we're going to be talking about the New York cannabis industry. Is it really one big real estate play? All right, well, as I've been saying in previous episodes lately, we would love to have you guys subscribe or hit the like button. Actually, we'd love to have you do both. And that's if you're on YouTube. If you're watching us on a podcast, give us a good rating and download it, tell your friends about it, all that good stuff. Leave in the comments any questions you have. We'd love to hear about that, questions, comments, or things you think we should discuss or do differently. All of the above. Well, with all that, let's get into it. I'm going to kick it over to Jack.
Okay, this first article talks about the birth rate in the United States falling to a 42-year low. Why should that surprise or shock people? At 50,000 feet, maybe you say, I don't care. But this is kind of one of the things that went on in Japan and started some of the stagflation and some of the stagnant things that happened in Japan because their birth rate was not keeping up with the aging population. And certainly here in the United States, since we tax and spend money and with both hands and even print and spend money we don't have yet, I think this could become a problem because I think of this younger generation, we're not, that may be one of the urgencies too with the immigration. Obviously, if your birth rate isn't, keeping up with the aging population, that's kind of where immigration has in the past always been able to fuel the growth in this country. But it's like I said, it's a kind of article you look at and you might really say, well, who cares about that? But as we've seen in some of these other countries, when you have a birth rate that declines and it can't keep up with an aging population, it starts causing some problems with the economy. And you really have to look at, we've been hearing it for years, the problems with Social Security. If there's fewer younger workers to pay into something where you've got an aging population, it could spell trouble down the road. I don't know if you guys got the same taking a look at that article, but what do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you brought up Japan, and that's immediately what I thought of when I read the headline is, oh, we're going the way of Japan here in terms of the trouble that they had. And China, they had to loosen up their one-child policy. And, a lot of the liberalization on that was not because they were that was not because they suddenly became more family oriented. It was because they realized that the population it was problematic. It was starting to look like it was going to be problematic for having enough of the young generation to take care of the older generation. So I think this is becoming an issue the world over, and it's interesting to see that it's hitting the U.S. There was something about it that I thought was a little bit strange, though, is they were talking about the birth rate falling, and then one of the things they were talking about is how they were looking at teenagers in the U.S. with the birth rate falling or something like that. And I thought, well, those are kind of like, yeah, we don't want the overall birth rate to fall, but if it's the teenage birth rate falling, that's not necessarily where you sit on that a bad thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you because it's one of those interesting things. I mean, as I was growing up and everything, you always hear about overpopulation as an issue, but on the other hand, you see that we have space and land to house all these people, and so it's one of those interesting things. But I think you're exactly right. The kind of economic and societal impact that has is sort of difficult to put your finger on until you're living it. And so, yeah, I could see how that could be a big issue. And yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see how it plays out or if that's something that levels off over time as things change.
Not for nothing, but Western civilization could choose not to just run up a big bill and pass it off to the next generation. That could be one way to deal with this, right? And I say Western because it's not just us. It's like the whole Western world has this issue.
No, absolutely. We're we're tracking Western Europe pretty much on a point for point basis. We're about, 5-10 years behind all the things that have become problems over there, and you're seeing it more here. And it's interesting, Charlie, you said something about the land and the population. It's funny, if you live in Ohio and you've ever flown to California, you just look at miles and miles and miles of vacant land. And my wife and I were watching a movie the other night, and there's beautiful plush. I don't know why I always got it in my head that Montana was like desolate, but the actual location of what they were filming was Montana. It was beautiful. It was plush. It's like, wow, that looks like a great place to live. And I know some celebrities have tapped in on that, but there are places to expand. And I mean, obviously, as you have to build infrastructure to support population in those areas, but it's interesting. It's you look at the demographic, and there again, though, the more population, the more the drain on resources. But I just thought it was we've kind of been heading in that direction. So really, that article wasn't a surprise, but it kind of put an exclamation point on kind of what a lot of us were already feeling. Charlie, what do you got for us this week?
Yeah, so I've got kind of a different article. It was in Accounting Today, and it was called a company called Gilded launches a crypto payroll platform. And so it's kind of interesting because, as this crypto thing starts to take hold and is becoming more and more popular, everybody's trying to find a way to incorporate it into their business. And one of the ways is to try to pay your employees with cryptocurrency. And so the way this software works is that you basically do one big trade and you set up a transaction, and then you can pay up to 500 people using that cryptocurrency. And the article gave a few examples of how this is kind of gaining acceptance in more areas that it didn't use to previously. For example, in February, Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami, suggested that the city should offer that option to pay its municipal workers in that currency, but also start accepting tax payments in cryptocurrency. And Twitter's CEO Jack Dorsey said the company is also looking at paying employees in Bitcoin, and a couple of other examples as well. But I want to get you guys' take on, on the one hand, this seems far-fetched, because if you told me today that I was going to start receiving some of my pay in cryptocurrency, I would tell you I'm not ready for that. Let's not do that. But at the same time, so many people are ready for that. So I just want to get you guys' take on, do you think this is going to become commonplace, or is this maybe somebody trying to push a product before it has gained that type of acceptance to be used for something as core as taxes or payroll or other things of that nature?
I bet it depends on the industry you're in, how widely accepted this would be or how much in demand it would be. I mean, I don't have any particular reason to be paid in Bitcoin or not specifically Bitcoin, because I think in this case they were talking about, is it called Ethereum or Ethereum? Ethereum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have no reason personally to want to be paid that way. But yeah, you can imagine there might be some folks that maybe they're in the high tech sector or they're highly remote workers and they otherwise make use of cryptocurrency for things that they do, and so maybe they would want that. I mean, it makes you wonder from a logistical standpoint. Well, how do you handle all the payroll tax filings and things like that? So you pay the net paycheck in Ethereum or Ethereum. I keep saying it wrong. You make the net paycheck in Ethereum, and then you pay all the withholdings and all that to the governments and regular dollars or U.S. dollars if it's a U.S. based employee. Yeah, it sounds like a pretty narrow use case of an employee base that would want this kind of thing.
It's one of those things where I think that's why they're kind of looking on the sideline and they're looking for some big player to come in and normalize it or make it acceptable for everybody else. So, it's the usual suspects. Somebody like a Walmart or an Amazon or some big company that goes and starts using it, or, Twitter to a far, far lesser degree than those other behemoths. But, you want to get somebody with that name recognition. If they go in there and they start using it, it almost gets to a point to where it's acceptable, these other ones, and people start falling like dominoes. But kind of as Ty pointed out, it's like, that's swell if you want to pay your employees in this, but I don't think Uncle Sugar is gonna take too kindly to that yet. So until they're on board with it, with these different split payments and that, I think it's probably a little bit too much in its infancy. But I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a one or two or three big names to go and fall in line, and it'll become acceptable to others.
Well, and I think the other kind of interesting challenge this poses, which I was thinking about it, it's like everybody's paid in the dollar, for example, and it's a pretty constant value that people know what it's worth. So when you set up a pay rate, it's pretty obvious to know what you're getting back on the other end. But if you were to agree on your salary in cryptocurrency, that varies so much month to month. And it's not, at first I thought, well, that's kind of like employee stock options. I mean, you're getting paid in a currency that is other than other than the dollar. But I thought about it, and it's not quite the same because it's not the performance of the company that's tied into that. It's the performance of this other, thing that's moves drastically altogether. And so I just thought it might pose some kind of interesting challenges for companies who have either agreed to pay at some rate in that way or didn't set up their contracts robustly enough to handle big variations in what it's worth. So it'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on and see how that plays out. You got another article we can talk about, Jack?
Well, at the risk of earning the moniker Real Estate Jack, I mean, I can't go more than 2 or 3 weeks without having a real estate article in there. But, another one with the hot button. Here we go again. I mean, one begats the other. You've got a shortage of inventory in the housing market. And what happens when there's a shortage of inventory? Prices go up. So it is crazy, the stories that I am hearing from realtors. It's gotten to the point where, over ask is a given. Nobody asks for closing costs anymore. Nobody asks for home inspections anymore. They don't want to do anything to upset a potential seller. So, I mean, my God, it's a panacea out there. So obviously, when you have these white hot conditions that are in favor of the seller, you're gonna get prices like this, and that inventory just smaller and smaller. It's funny because my wife and I will go through the neighborhood and we see more people that are adding on to existing homes, and you get frustrated. And I sit in that B&I group and I hear it from everybody involved in real estate, where you'll have people that have 9, 10, 12, 15 houses they'll bid on and won't get any of them. And there's this whole, geez, I'm an FHA first time buyer and I need $6,000 or whatever, like 6% of closing. Those deals, I feel sorry for those people, because unless you have money put away yourself or a parent with a great big checkbook waiting to help you out, you're going to have a hard time getting houses. And I don't know, I got to throw it out there to you guys, but based on the conditions I see, I don't see this changing anytime soon. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's not even just houses. I was talking this week with some some bankers and with some other small business operators, and to my surprise, the commercial real estate market, in terms of companies, small businesses wanting to buy buildings and get into facilities for whatever it is that they do, is actually fairly hot as well. That there's a lot of deal flow out there with businesses doing that, and so and it was counterintuitive to me because we know, of course, with workers staying home, I think about, I guess my mind automatically goes to the downtown offices and how they may not be doing as well, and that may be very true, but then as I was hearing about some of the deal flow that's going on out there, I realized, but that's not what most of this is. This is, these commercial spaces are in the suburbs, they're in rural areas, they're all over the place. And yeah, of course, businesses, especially those that make things, still have to have a place to make things. And so I think that, the shortage is affecting there too, because we've talked about it on this show before, the news about lumber prices, right? Construction materials that's part of the story. And the shortage here is that there's not a lot of new construction going on because the supply chain for construction materials has been stifled, and that's created higher prices in that, which has probably been part of what's led to some of this. So it's definitely interesting. It's interesting to see where that goes and think about, when does that settle out? I mean, we've got real estate markets as well as the stock market seemingly doing well, or at least prices being really hot and high. And I think the sentiment across the board is, but what's the timing for when this either levels off or goes down, kind of thing. So I don't have any answers on this, but definitely something that I'm trying to pay attention to.
I think that's all right, and that makes sense. The only thing I would sort of add to that is just to say that I think as people look towards everything to begin to reopen, I think you get the same speculation that caused people to leave commercial space before, which now once they will try to get into it earlier now before this big boom of the economy reopening causes those prices to just become unmanageable. So I think that's a factor too. And if you guys don't mind me transitioning, I've got another article here that I think is sort of similar in the same vein. In the New York Times, there was an article called "A Land Grab for a Piece of New York's Marijuana Business." And so what's going on there is that recreational marijuana has been legalized in New York. And so companies and brokers are trying to get, established space for that. And they're running into a couple of challenges that we've seen here in Oregon and in Portland, but that are sort of new challenges to people from New York. So what they're finding is that, for example, a lot of people who run a cannabis business can't buy a building because the banks won't give them financing, and they try to rent a building, but a lot of times the landlords don't want to rent to a person who's doing something that is federally illegal on their property. And so what they do is they make it difficult to then, obtain leases and that sort of thing. And these business owners are kind of learning that the hard way and getting charged premium rates and that sort of thing. And they have even like agricultural land upstate is getting dubbed as the green zone because of how highly in demand it is. And so it's kind of interesting. One of the senators put out there's kind of a moral element to this as well. And one of the senators put out a quote that said they can't fathom the idea of the devil's lettuce in their borders. And so I was just thinking about, kind of made me laugh because, New York has not historically been somewhere that's been known for its squeaky clean demeanor. I guess I just wanted to get your guys' take on whether or not, what kind of apocalyptic hellscape will New York become once the devil's lettuce takes over? What do you guys think?
I don't know. Almost. When it comes to New York, can it get any worse? But it's funny. We were just talking about this before with the crypto clearance. We've up until now, it hasn't been these major media centers of influence states that have gone legalized marijuana. So you talk about acceptance. The fact that you've gotten Massachusetts and now New York. If they flip New York, you're starting to get these states. If it's okay in New York, I think it becomes okay for some of these other states to come along. And it's interesting what you mentioned about New York. Now I live in a fairly close proximity to New York. Oddly enough, like I tell people, I've been to Paris and London, but I've never been to New York City. But I have been through upper state New York, and there's wine fields and farm country. It's kind of different to what you associate with New York City, but they're like a lot of these other struggling cities, right? There's tax, they want to provide services at this level, and the only way to pay for those services is you got to bring in the tax revenue. And I think these states are looking at legalizing marijuana is an easier way to get there. And I think the fact that New York has climbed on board, kind of bodes well to a discussion we had on here about a month ago with when we dedicated the entire show to the cannabis industry. I think, getting somebody like New York to flip, it's going to become acceptable for a lot more. And it was weird. I don't know if I said it on that show or not, but we were talking about the areas of the country, and heck, if they ever already got to medical marijuana here in Ohio, believe me, if you could flip the Midwest, you'll flip everybody else, because the Midwest, nobody does business in the Midwest until they have, a DNA sample in your ancestry going back to the Mayflower. So if you can flip people in the Midwest, believe me, you're gonna get them to go forward and with marijuana. But I don't see it as the sky is falling. I just think it's another one of these big states with a lot of potential is seeing the benefits to it, and that's why they're legalizing it.
Yeah, I'll second. I have a similar experience to Jack. I've been around the world to major metropolis. I'll throw all mine in there. London, Paris, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Toronto, and Canada. I've gone all the way around everywhere you could go around New York without actually going into New York. So I had the same thing. I haven't actually been to our own homegrown mega city here. But yeah, setting aside that fun geography tour. In the cannabis industry, this is something we've seen. I mean, I think I think you see this also in any kind of retail. I mean, any retail becomes a real estate game to some extent, right? For Starbucks, it's somewhat of a real estate game, right? Because you can only have, reasonably speaking, without, setting aside any kind of regulation, how many coffee shops, how many coffee stands can any particular community support in a particular neighborhood or within the same square block. And I can see Charlie smiling because he knows, Starbucks has certainly pushed the possible limits on that question, right? And I would say here in Oregon, we would say cannabis dispensaries have really tried to push the limits on that question as well. but and it's like, how many actual cannabis dispensaries will you need when it's all said and done? But I think this is a strategy that is going on. It is a real estate game. I think a lot of some of the kind of cannabis investors and cannabis companies are in fact really just playing a real estate game, and you can see what they're doing because they go in to states where they can get in some way to get a license and a location set up, and they operate pretty marginal businesses. And when you really dig into it, you realize they don't care about how marginal the businesses they're operating. Or you have larger companies or funds that are going in and they're buying out very marginal businesses, and you kind of scratch your head and think, well, what kind of due diligence was done on this, or how did they see the value in this, right? But what you realize is that the value of the operations is actually not there in the first. They don't care. What they care about is that they're buying up the location, they're buying up the real estate, they're getting the license and the real estate. And of course, in the cannabis industry, you do have the added regulation, which makes that real estate play even more valuable, right? Because it, unlike the Starbucks where you're prevented from, unlike the Starbucks where the upper limit on having another cannabis location nearby is not just market forces, right? The upper limit on having another cannabis location nearby is neighborhood approval, community approval, and all the regulatory hurdles you've got to jump. And so, yeah, that's a strategy that's there. I think there's a timing issue with it because you're banking on some of that value being related to that particular regulatory framework. And this particular regulatory framework has to do with how the states and the communities regulate these operations currently, in concert with the fact that cannabis is still federally illegal. So I think that if you're in that game, you got to be constantly monitoring what's going on with community standards and regulations. And if you're playing that game nationwide, like some of these folks are, then yeah, that's a big job. I mean, a compliance director is a job. I mean, it's a big thing to stay on top of all the rules and regulations and community standards that you're following, and also that you're basically leveraging to create value to the investment that you have. So yeah, I mean, I think I don't know the particulars of how New York is regulating, but from the article, it makes it sound like it would be. It sounds like it is open enough. The way the state's doing it is open enough that it does become a real estate land grab. The one thing that I thought was interesting in the discussion was the lease versus ownership question, and that I saw that in the article where they talked about how some of the cannabis operators are saying, they would much prefer to own their locations than lease them. And the article suggested that the primary reason that cannabis operators did not own their locations was because of financing, that they just didn't have the financing. They couldn't get the money from the bank, for example, to borrow money to buy a location that was specifically owned by a cannabis business or a cannabis operator. And I think that some of that is true, but I think they're underestimating how much of the operators are working with accountants and lawyers to deal with federal tax law, because there early on there was a sentiment that, or an idea conceptually, that leasing your space was better from a tax standpoint in terms of how you dealt with the deductibility of costs. And so I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but I do think there were a lot of operators out there who thought that was true and were operating in that way. So yeah, that's another element to this, is tax policy plays into this question of how much of these businesses are about buying real estate versus leasing. But I think those are almost two different discussions, right? Like, it's a real estate play, so to speak, even if you don't buy the location. If you just get a locked in long-term lease and you have the license, the cannabis license to use in that location, I would say that is a real estate type play, even though you don't own the location. This question about whether you own it or lease it is a different real estate question. So I think the article kind of put those two things together, but to me, they're kind of two different questions, really. So yeah, I just spewed all my thoughts and everything in my head on that, plus some.
No, it's interesting that you talk about a real estate play, because they've often said that about McDonald's. One of the greatest things with McDonald's is they were in every prime location. So if you look at some of the dinosaurs have gone by the wayside, Sears, Kmart, where are they located? Prime, they had value in that. It's all in that real estate location. So a lot of these ones that may not be performing as a business, there's always that real estate play. And McDonald's comes to mind. I mean, there is a fortune to be made through McDonald's just based on what they have in real estate.
Yeah, I've always heard that as well, that's been their kind of biggest moneymaker. And that makes sense because, like you said, you see them everywhere. Just to kind of add on to Ty's argument about the different localities, the article also talked about how different cities, towns, and villages have until December 31st to opt out of some of these new laws. And so, just like you said, it's not clear exactly how it will play out. And people are forced into this perspective kind of thing of deciding where they're going to place their operations before maybe having clarity on what the law will actually bode for that spot. So yeah, I just thought it was an interesting discussion piece. I knew that we'd have some different things to say on it. So yeah, I'm glad we talked about it.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for another podcast of the None of Our Businesses YouTube podcast show with Ty and Charlie. Hey, you might be wondering where is AJ? Where are Mark? Where's Lisa? Well, you know what? You can find them on our sister broadcast, Profitless on Purpose. You want to hear about the nonprofit industry? Go check them out. They also have their own channel. Again, we appreciate your support. Glad to see you this week, and we hope to see you back here next week. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
See you, everyone.